Trying to conceive and feeling overwhelmed and confused with unhelpful information and advice? This podcast is for you. Welcome to Don't Tell Me to Relax. I'm your host, Hannah Pern, a fertility acupuncturist and passionate advocate for better fertility education and support. Our aim is to empower you with information to support your fertility journey and provide a community for connection with people who get where you're at. If you'd like to join us or work with us in clinic in London or across the UK, all the information is in the show notes at the end.
AcuPip's sponsors Don't Tell Me to Relax. If you're looking for a way to naturally balance your body, calm your mind and relieve anxiety, then AcuPips has the answer. AcuPips is the UK's original ear seed company, founded by traditional acupuncturist Zoe Young. Ear seeds are small seeds or metal balls attached to an adhesive and placed on pressure points on the ear in specific combinations, creating balance within the body. Discover more today at acupips.com and use code RELAX for 20% off site-wide. AcuPips. Modern healing, ancient practice.
Hello and welcome to this last episode of our series. I am joined today by Julia Bueno, who is a psychotherapist and counsellor and author of 2 books, one of which we are going to discuss today, which is the award-winning Brink of Being. The Brink of Being looks at miscarriage and explores how little we discuss it, how there is a lack of support and how isolated people who go through this feel. And Julia talks about her own experiences, looks at the history of miscarriage and highlights the issue with case histories from people she has worked with in her own clinic. And I have been frantically reading this book, which I've just confessed to Julia I finished literally 10 minutes ago. And I have not read a book that quickly in such a long time, because usually I fall asleep within 2 pages of a book these days. But I could not stop reading it because it really resonated so much with me and what people say in our clinic and in our community. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today, Julia. Thank you so much for being here and for your time. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what led you to this work?
Well, Hannah, thank you so much for having me. It's really lovely to be here. You've kindly introduced me, and yes, I'm a psychotherapist, and I've been working for 20 years now. Now in private practice, but I've worked in various settings, and I've done a lot of work over the years supporting individuals and couples through infertility and pregnancy loss. I wasn't always a psychotherapist. I came to it after a pretty unsuccessful career in the law, and where I got out and had a think. But during that process, I got married and got pregnant quite soon after marriage with twins. And in the 22nd week of my pregnancy, I went into labour, and I delivered both twins, and that's something I write about at the beginning of my book. And yeah, that experience was pretty life-changing, shattering, and put me on a new set of rails. While I was in the wake of that, I'd been thinking about it before, but that kind of set me certain that I wanted to go into supporting people. And I originally was thinking of just training as a counsellor, but I ended up doing a 5-year training and becoming a psychotherapist. So it was very much that experience that galvanised a new pathway for me. I then went on, while I was training, and after losing the twins, I felt pregnant very quickly again, like a lot of women do. The yearning was still there. Something I also write about. I think I was not well supported and frankly a bit kind of crazed. And the thinking at the time, this was 20 years ago, both amongst family and friends and the medical professionals, was just to crack on and get pregnant as soon as possible. So I did that, and my son came very early. So it was 9 months later I had my son, and had 3 more miscarriages after him, and then my other son. So it was a sort of decade-long battle during which I was working as well. So my professional experience, of course, draws on my own as well.
I'm sorry that you went through all of that, Julia.
Thank you. There's no sell by date in saying that word, so I appreciate that.
When you were going through all of that, what was the support like then? So you said it was 20 years ago.
Yes.
What was it like then?
Well, it was very different from it is now, and I'm delighted that the differences are in place. Things have really moved on, but 23 years ago, um, i people well, in the health in the hospital, there was very little training amongst staff around kind of bereavement. Miscarriage was kept very separately from all other types of pregnancy loss. I was, as I say, encouraged to just go home and crack on and get pregnant again. Um, I, to be fair, I did have a follow up with a midwife who did visit me once. But for example, I had such a late miscarriage, and it can happen early on in earlier weeks of gestation, losing even at 14 weeks, your milk can come in, but, my boobs filled up with milk, and I had no idea what to do. I hadn't even prepped in that. So the long and short, it was I didn't get much support from professionals, and certainly not from friends and family who didn't really know what miscarriage was. It just
Mm,
was not spoken about at all. Um, and I mean, yeah, and let alone the fact that um, a late miscarriage could involve labour. In my case, the labour went on for many, many hours. My one twin was delivered 12 hours before the next, but for a lot of people, they just assumed that, I just had it on the loo, or it had been reabsorbed, or, nobody really understood. So it was, yeah, it was a very isolating time. I'm pausing because I also know that I had a better time of it than my mother's generation.
mm,
Um, and I did, and I write about in the book, I did have one fantastic midwife, a male midwife, who I know stayed beyond his shift to help me through the labour. And I still think about him to this day because he really did get me through it, and he got it.
mm.
I months later, I tried to trace him, in fact, he'd left the hospital. But little does he know, I think about him regularly to this day. But 20 years on, we've come on leaps and bounds, which is really fantastic to see.
What would you say are the biggest changes that you've seen during that period of time? Where have the improvements been, do you think?
Well, for one, going back to kind of the medical care, of course there are exceptions, and um, this is a much bigger systemic issue around funding and resourcing. But there's been so much more training and awareness amongst staff, and EPUs, the early pregnancy units now kind of flourish, and all the staff are fantastically well trained because half the people turning up there will miscarry. There's many, many more bereavement midwives are being trained up, and just generally, and we have organisations signing up to pregnancy loss pledge. Systemically, we've just had last week the announcement of the bill for leave. Um, baby loss certificates we can now order on through the NHS. So this sort of institutional recognition has come on hugely, which is fantastic to see. I get the very strong impression that I hear less and less sort of stories of quite sort of bad or clunky or unfeeling treatment in hospitals. And whenever it does happen, it's not through lack of training or understanding or compassion. It's through lack of resourcing.
Mm,
um,
mm,
Women still have to go through a late miscarriage on a labour ward, which is something I would never wish a woman to have to go through. When you're delivering a dead baby, when there's a baby, screaming next door and joys, and but again, that's resourcing. There isn't the money to build enough bereavement suites, etc. So and culturally, I think we have really, really moved on thanks to lots of advocacy work through social media and the power of that and the internet, and a lot more writing in the media. And my book wouldn't have been published 10 years ago,
mm.
and many more books have been published in my wake. And not, I mean, I'll come back to that, but also just the wind in the sails of a general, I think, awareness of medical misogyny and women's reproductive health generally being so minimized and sidelined and under researched, etc. So pregnancy loss sort of situates in this much bigger kind of important, valuable movement we've got. We're talking much more about the woeful under research of endometriosis and birth prolapses, etc. So that's been a really good thing, which I think has really benefited it. But I think, I'd be interested to hear what you think. But I very much get the sense that now, in my day, if I said I had a miscarriage, I would clean out the room. People would just look at the floor or literally leave the room or change the subject. Now, I think if somebody says I had a miscarriage or my partner's had a miscarriage, most people now will go, "Oh, I'm sorry," which is great. And I'm really grateful for that, but I'm greedy. And I would say that we haven't yet got to the stage of asking, whoa, tell me about it. What happened? How many weeks pregnant? Did you have a name? How did, are you having a funeral? Whatever, just going into the details that you might ask of any other death or big event, sort of going into the details. So yes, we have come on a lot, but I still think there is still fear and I don't know about stigma, but I think there is still a fear and an underlying kind of backing away from reproductive health issues. It's
I think what I see in clinic and in our community is a real range of responses and issues. So for some people, they feel very well supported, they feel they've had really good care. And then for other people, it sounds like nothing has changed in the last 20 years. I think it still, there is a huge difference. And I think there are great improvements for some people,
yes,
but I don't see it for everybody. And I still hear stories of nobody wanting to talk about it, people being sort of feeling like they've got to crack on, or people feeling like they don't want to talk about it too much because it's dragging people down, or they don't have the right to talk about it because so and so has had it so much worse.
yeah,
There is still a lot of that.
yes.
And sometimes I think that comes a lot with that bigger thing around being female and taking up space with your own feelings, putting your own feelings first. A lot of that I see coming up a lot in clinic. I think people giving themselves permission to take time off, time away from work, say no to things. I think it's still very problematic for lots of people to really
Yeah.
care for themselves.
Yeah, I think I get so excited by the kind of progress that we've made that
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm not saying there hasn't been progress, because there has 100%, but it's still a way to go.
I won't challenge anything you've just said. Then yeah, absolutely, there's a way to go, and I still think there is, lots of reasons for it. But this sort of fear about approaching the kind of visceral nature of miscarriages. It is messy, emotionally and physically, and I think one thread of that is still a kind of recoil from thinking about women's bodies and what they can get up to, and people don't want to confront that.
Yeah. Yeah. So over the years, over the years, you have worked with lots of people in lots of different ways in clinic, through your book, through all your work. So can you just tell us, what are the responses that you see? I know everybody is unique, and that really comes across in the book. And I really love that everybody's response to this is completely different and unique, and there's no right or wrong. But what are the common responses that you see? And this is a really big question. Any helpful information, advice, or reflections from your years of experience that people might find helpful if they are going through this situation now?
Well, to deal with the first bit first, I mean, I think there's a sort of paradox that the kind of commonality, I think, of the experience of pregnancy loss is the uniqueness of each story. I mean, as I said in the book, I kind of really wanted to emphasize that every person's experience of their pregnancy is a unique one. Their story is tethered to their own reproductive story, um, and um, so that the grief and the loss is attached to that particular imagined family life, that imagined future, which can become exquisitely detailed. It just happens, if it was when you're wanting to be pregnant, and I should emphasize that, yearning to be pregnant, you might have spent months and months or even years and years thinking about your child's name and colors of the nursery wall and what's even school they're going to go to. So this all happens even before the pregnancy test says yes. So, and obviously that's the unique bit, but that is also mapped on everybody. So the kind of commonality is that particular grief. It's a very particular grief because it's so future oriented. Most when we lose a loved one, we're looking back and we're remembering the treasures of the past. This is a strange one because we're imagining the treasures of the future, which is such an exquisitely private thing. It's only shared in your mind or perhaps your partner's mind too through conversations. So that makes it so difficult for other people to get unless they ask. So the commonality, so I'm being really kind of round around the houses with this answer, but the kind of commonality is that people just don't ask, or I'm not going to say they don't want to know, but they may not sort of think to know or ask. So it becomes a very isolating and lonely making experience. And which is, why the pregnancy loss community is such a strong one, because you can reach out and talk to people who might be complete strangers, but you connect on knowing of that and being able to share those stories freely. So that's a really common experience, is feeling sort of so isolated. And with that isolation can often be, and these are feelings. I'll come on. So I'm racing ahead, but feeling very angry and envious, and sort of the darker feelings that we don't like to have. But it can feel really bloody unfair. Yes, it's a common experience, but it doesn't. 1 in 4 pregnancies is the rule of thumb, but 3 and 4 don't. And for every person who's had a loss, they know friends who just shut their eyes and got pregnant without even knowing. So that kind of injustice, a lot of anger can go about through our experience in the hospitals, especially in emergency and A&E. That's can often be quite a brutal, and I use that word deliberately, kind of experience for a lot of people. So there can be a lot of anger about kind of care and people not getting it or changing the subject and or not being compassionate. And envy, yes, why would you not be envious? I mean, that this is just so human, and a lot of people I speak to, but both women and men, can feel really badly about those darker aspects. I don't see them as dark at all, but they really worry about feeling angry or bitter or envious, on top of everything else. So that's this leads on to kind of what my piece of advice, and you're right. It's just there is no rule book. There is no linear path through this particular grief. Everything and anything goes. And I just bash this home over and over again, to be kind to yourself, to let yourself feel those feels. Give permission for them, because they're all information, that those feelings are all telling us things that we need to feel. Envy tells us that, ouch, I really want what you've got. It doesn't make you a nasty person. So, we can do ourselves a disservice by trying to kind of squeeze ourselves to crack on or not feel that thing, or and a lot of people I speak to kind of fear that if they do that, then they'll discombobulate, they won't function, they'll just fall in a heap. And I've never seen that happen, really. That actually the paradox is, if we do allow ourselves with compassion to do that, we can function, we can, we are very capacious, we can carry on doing our dues, um, and possibly, probably with greater ease, rather than sort of blocking things.
Mm.
So Yeah, that's my top tip is just don't expect to feel anything in particular in any particular order. And this, I mean, this applies to kind of grief in general. It can come up uninvited, and we might be having a good day, and then we're sideswiped, and that that happens.
Mm,
Um, and with the kind of, do tell me to shut up and butt in, but with the kind of I'm going to caveat sort of saying just let everything be. Don't not to be passive in it. Being compassionate to yourself. Compassion isn't a kind of woolly, passive, gooey thing. It's a confronting, courageous acty thing. It's an
mm,
active thing. So that also might mean being really intentional and conscious about how you're going to look after yourself. So um, taking the time off work, having that conversation with your boss, saying no to a baby shower in the best terms you can, if possible. Um, Thinking about, how am I going to get through these days? What sort of things do give me some pleasure or soothing? Choosing the company you're going to be with. Um, I know that I really love weeding or cooking biscuits or going hiking or whatever it is, being really intentional to think about how to support yourself. So, um, as I say, it's not, I'm not sort of saying surrender to all the feelings and let yourself go down a hole. Be active with that too.
mm.
Hope that
I,
makes
I,
sense.
I, yeah, it absolutely does, and I 100% agree with what you're saying. The problem that I see a lot, and obviously I'm sure you do too, is that people often find it very difficult to give themselves permission to
Yeah.
do exactly that.
Yeah.
And there is always this feeling of just cracking on
Yeah.
and of I couldn't possibly stop my work. I couldn't possibly discuss it with my work. I am the one who always gets on with things in my family. I'm the carer. I'm the one who sorts everything out in my relationship. So often that feeling of giving into your feelings or putting yourself first, I I talk about it a lot with people in clinic. I talk about it a lot in the community, and people say, "Yeah, yeah, 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 yeah." But I can't do that. I can't do that for me,
Yeah.
and it comes up a lot. And
Yeah.
so I don't know how you get around that block where you, on one level, you understand completely what somebody is saying and you can see the value of it. You might even say it to your own friend, but to do it for yourself is really difficult.
And that's where I have the privilege of therapy work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have the time week after week. Sometimes I end up seeing people for a very long time because that dynamic in that person more often than not has roots that go back. So I
Yeah.
have the privilege of unpacking, okay, what's all this about? And
Mm.
it might well be, as you say, a kind of caregiving role that someone picked up really young in the family. Mum was unwell, or mum and dad were splitting up, and I stepped up and had younger siblings, or so I can help um, bring some context and understanding to that, which can enable people to then think, to slow down and think about this role, and think about it. What's going on in the here and now is so informed by the past.
Yeah.
I have the privilege of that work. Um, and the other thing also, alongside that, um, and I'm with you, I wrote a book about self-criticism.
I'll read that one next. That's my next one.
Okay, so, there was a link,
Right.
to self-criticism is a golden thread that comes through all the work. I don't work just with pregnancy loss. I work with a lot of people who are suffering with other things. Um, and this comes up a lot in the reproductive work I do too. So there was a link, but so I'm with you. It's a very common thing, that sort of self-critical edge. I must achieve. I must crack on. I must be the strong one. But also so as I say, I have the privilege of sort of I'm resisting saying unpacking that because I always think, oh, I have a vision of someone with a suitcase, and if anyway. But there is something in that mix too, which I do want to kind of respect and allow for, which is genuine desire to crack on, because
Mm,
the yearning is still there,
mm,
and it gives people a real sense of moving ahead and not feeling static or stagnant, or their life is, I don't need to tell you, in your community, it's such a common experience. If you like, your life is on hold. Well, we do all sorts of things to try and counter that and to challenge that experience, and by, minding what we eat and what we drink and how we exercise and etc. But also the yearning is still there. So we for a lot of us, actually, it's important to crack on. I respect that, but
mm,
I think both you and I are getting at, it's just the way we crack on, the way we do it. There is a compassionate way and there's a less compassionate way, and I'm with you that a lot of women I talk to can be really tough on themselves.
mm. And I'd just like to ask you more about the chapter. I think it's called A Child in Mind. Is it the first chapter, second chapter?
Yeah.
I really resonated with this idea of the grief that comes from the negative pregnancy test or the
Yes.
unsuccessful
Yes.
round of IVF. And often people, again, I often hear people say, well, it was just a cycle,
Yes.
or I
Yes.
go again, or I don't have it's like there is again this
Minimizing.
inability to feel the grief that comes from going through IVF, paying all that money, often investing emotion, time, physical body, and then it not being successful at the end of it, and this, well, do you just crack on again? We're going back to cracking on.
Yeah.
Just that time for that grief of that process, and how you talk about that, I just thought was so helpful, because again, it's often dismissed or overlooked.
Absolutely, and it comes back to this idea of a pecking order, which
Mm,
which us in the community don't. I can't speak for you, Hannah, but I just don't have one.
mm,
And actually, backing up to the kind of progress that I've seen in recent years, and the National Bereavement Care Pathway that's been rolling out since 2018, and now every NHS trust signed up to it. That is embedded, enshrined in that whole pathway. Is there's no pecking order of grief there. That it's the child in mind. So that's really wonderful to see. But as you say, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist out there. And you're absolutely right. When I run support groups, I see some people holding back or kind of embarrassed because you can't mind doing air quotes here in the podcast, but it's just a loss at 6 weeks, whereas you lost one at 14 weeks. But yeah, absolutely. No, this is a bit of a digression, but way, way before I started, even my first pregnancy, I remember reading, there's a journalist called John Ronson, who I'm a great
mm,
fan of. Yeah. He, I mean, his son Joel, I think, is mid-20s. So 25 years ago, when he's been writing forever, I remember reading, he was quite confessional. He was quite unusual for that, but he was writing about him and his wife's struggle to get pregnant 25 years ago. And he described his wife's grief as when her period came every month, as an empty coffin. And
mm,
that really, really stuck with me back then. And that sort of begun to, the seed was sown. And I think you're right. I think it's just such the child in mind is a really profound bond, and it doesn't correlate with what's going on in your body. Whether there has been a fertile, I mean, some women find out at their 12-week scan that they've got a molar pregnancy. Technically there isn't, an embryo hasn't been developed, but for all those weeks and running up to it, there's been a baby nestling in their mind. And
mm,
that's the issue, isn't it? That's the kind of nub of it that
mm,
gets missed by the outside world.
mm.
And
And I think, sorry.
no, I mean, it's just we also, as a kind of culture, respond to kind of visible signs. Um, if you've got a bump, then people get it more than if you don't.
Mm, mm. I also think it's the phrase, what the podcast is called, Don't Tell Me to Relax. Our community is called Don't Tell Me to Relax, because that whole notion of saying to somebody, you need to stop thinking about it, you need to just relax, is so dismissive of all of those thoughts, hopes, desires, that it can just be wiped and dismissed in one sentence, that it's as easy as just relaxing and it will happen. And I find that so difficult.
Yeah, excuse my if I'm allowed to do mild swearing on your podcast, it's just a bloody stupid thing to say anyway. I mean, telling anybody not to worry about anything in itself is, um,
Yeah.
it's like telling someone, don't think about a white elephant. Ta-da! But yeah,
Yeah.
it's extremely so on that level that just annoys me. But and also it's completely bypasses the reality of what that person's been. You cannot have a pregnancy after loss without it being a worry. So that it kind of bypasses
Mm,
the whole understanding of that. Yeah, it's a
mm,
really kind of naive thing to say. I get it why people say it. They, I do believe the very most people are benign and mean well.
mm. And you also have a chapter on the male point of view,
Yeah,
which again, I, I feel like the male role in reproduction again is definitely changing. There's more
yeah,
and more about the physicality of sperm and sperm health and the
yeah,
importance of that, and male investigations, but also the role of the male partner in grief, and how the man copes with this. It was really, really lovely, the case histories that you discuss. So is there anything more that you can say for people who are listening, whose male partners, they might want to discuss it more, or where they can go, or how they can deal with their own emotions around this?
yeah. I mean, with the fact that it is discussed more, and and there is much more kind of research going into male factor infertility and male factor role in miscarriage. Along with that, there is more interest in the research and around the psychological impact, and there are more support groups out there, and there are some men groups. But in my experience, uh, and obviously it's anecdotal, a lot of men don't really want to. They don't necessarily want to have kind of face-to-face work or face-to-face support groups. I mean, this is wildly generic, I know, but I write about this sort of gender difference between intuitive and instrumental grieving that's sort of reflected in the literature. And in other words, intuitive grieving tends to be the more kind of female response, where women kind of it looks like from the outside, yeah, the way the way people grieve, crying, reaching out, being kind of emotional, perhaps kind of withdrawing. And whereas an instrumental griever, which tends to be more male, are doers. They'll go
Mm,
and this is so reflected when I talk to the charities, that it's often the male partner will ring up and say, when's your next marathon? Can I run that? Or,
mm,
can I do? They might be the one, and I write about this, that in heterosexual couples, the men will be the one to sort stuff out and get the flowers at the door, or get stuff. Obviously, that's very um, stereotypical. I'm a absolute textbook instrumental griever. I don't do it intuitively, so there are exceptions. But so what am I saying? So that yes, there is more support that, but just for men to understand that's because a lot of men don't understand that they, how do I put it? It's not like they don't understand they're not grieving, but because there is this understanding that grief looks this certain way, they might sort of feel that they're doing it wrong, or their partners think they're doing it wrong. So just understanding that we can all grieve in myriad ways, and there's an expression by an American psychologist called George Banana. He calls kind of coping ugly, and I like that phrase because it just he's making a case for we all can cope, and even mordant humor. Some people are going to laugh at really inappropriate times. That doesn't mean they're not caring, or
mm,
it's we there is a much broader way that we grieve than is sort of understood by the textbook, by the you know mainstream. So for men to understand that they don't have to do it in a particular way, and if they want to run a marathon or build a garden fence or But knowing, but there's something about being aware of what they're doing and being aware that that's okay is really important. Um,
Mm.
Having said that, there are some fantastic. I'm in Wales at the moment. There's a fantastic uh, s- woman here who does a lot of work around baby loss, and she has um, a, a- um, a place for men to go with a dartboard and pool tables, and she's in the woods. And her husband kind of runs groups for men to, they do
Mm.
things together, and that suits a
Mm.
lot of men who might not
Mm.
want to talk, but just going on a good old romp. And
Mm.
so and it's also, not that you asked this question, but it's really important for couples to understand that of each other.
Yeah.
So a woman, quite often I've had this conversation thinking that he's not getting, he's gone back to work, or he's running all the time, or he seems to be doing okay and not getting it, but that might not well be the case.
Mm.
He's also, I see this quite a lot, he's really mindful not to burden his partner. She's gone through physical hell, is in emotional hell. He doesn't want to then say, "Look, I'm hurting too."
Mm.
There's that sense of sort of being the, protector and supporter. But the irony is, actually, most women I know in those partnerships wouldn't find it a burden at all. They'd find it relieving. They'd find it, because
Mm.
it's a connecty thing. It makes, it's an intimacy that they really crave and they need to know.
Mm. And just following on from that, if as people are listening and they haven't experienced this themselves, but they want to support a loved one, a sister, daughter, colleague who has been through baby loss, pregnancy loss, what kind of advice could you give to people? Because as we said at the beginning, people are so unsure about saying the wrong thing, or they feel really uncomfortable. They might not know what's happened. What kind of information can you share to help somebody in that situation?
Well, I always kind of premise this question with a bit of caution around telling people what to do or say, because some people, and I can think I know people like that, are absolutely wonderful, compassionate people, but they're not good with words, and they might not want to have that conversation for their own
Mm.
reasons. So in those cases, I would suggest doing things. I don't make a shepherd's pie and just turn up and say, "Here, put it in the freezer," or whatever. Can I walk your dog? Can I hoover your house? Um, don't don't say, "Is there anything I can do? Just let me know."
Mm-mm.
Because that's can often be kind of a bit of a burden, and not someone doesn't want to have to think about that. But being proactive about, "Look, can I do X, Y, and Z?" But if you are so that's one idea. But if you are somebody who is up for the conversation and really does want to do that, then um, it ask, asking questions, real kind of compassionate curiosity, not in a kind of prurient way, but look, the best way I can. I'm not saying you say this, but the best way any one of us can understand and help someone else is trying to understand, get into their inner and outer world and understand. So it's, obviously, I'm so sorry, but how do you feel about talking about it? I'd love to hear more. I'd really want to understand what you've been through. It might be that person doesn't want to. We in grief, there are days when we want to talk about it, and days we just want the world to bugger off. So sussing out, tuning into whether that conversation is going to land well. If you say something clumsy, and oh my days, I still remember some humdingers said to me. My advice would be to just move on quickly. "Oh, I'm really sorry. That was a really clumsy thing to say. That came out wrong." Move on. What
Mm.
isn't helpful is to go, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, oh no, I feel dreadful." Then then you end up in this game of looking after each other. And speaking for myself and many people, I don't think you're really up for looking after someone else when you're feeling really crappy. So,
Mm.
that's human. And actually, I think most people respond well to human error and owning it. So that
Mm.
would be another thing. But a lot of people, I think, would just like the opportunity to tell their story. And as I
Mm.
say, not to not going in. not going into any conversation assuming anything, like
Yeah.
we said, going back before, "Oh, it can't be that bad because, she had a miscarriage at 6 weeks, whereas, I know somebody lost something at 22 weeks, that's gotta be so much worse." Well, not necessarily.
Mm,
I should also say, Hannah, that, not all pregnancy losses involve grief.
mm,
So I've also spoken to women who've just gone, "Whoa, oh man, the nurse came in with a memory box and it was that was all just so misattuned." So tuning into what that loss meant, it could have been a really terrifying, agonizing experience with a lot of pain, more blood than you've ever seen from your, period in your life. All of that can be really, genuinely traumatic. And we know about PTSD as a reality there. But there was no relationship there. There wasn't a child in mind yet, or the pregnancy
mm,
was unwanted. There can be pregnancy losses that are a relief, and
mm.
I've supported
Yeah.
women with that. So I do want to say that too. The bottom line here is being open to. Well, I suppose it goes back to what we said at the beginning, isn't it? That this unique relationship to a pregnancy. That
Mm,
story is tethered to an individual pregnancy, and every pregnancy is different. I I had 5 and each one was different. So it's just being open to tuning into that and being, if you're up for it, that curiosity and not going in there with any preconceptions, to coin a phrase, or assumptions.
mm. And one of the most difficult things that I see a lot is when people have been through loss and then they are trying to conceive again.
Mm.
And that whole journey into trying to conceive, and then when people do get pregnant, being pregnant again after loss is such a difficult place to
Yeah,
be. And people feel completely, well,
yeah,
people feel I mean, as you said, it's very individual, but lots of people feel completely out of control and riddled with anxiety
yeah,
and stress, and their nervous system is just, I work with nervous systems, so I
yeah,
see nervous systems like through the roof. I'm always amazed that people get up and get on, and they get pregnant again, and they go through a pregnancy after traumatic
yeah,
loss. What any thoughts or information again that can help people who are listening who are going through that, of like, how
yeah.
do you get through that, because it's so hard.
It is really hard, and what I would say is you will get through it, to start off with. Um, Maybe picking up on something I've talked about before, be that I talk to a lot of women who come to me and say, "Right, how am I gonna get rid of this anxiety?"
Mm,
So, I ditch that idea straight off. Listen, this is, not good news, but you're not going to not be anxious. That's appropriate. Of course you will be. So it's more about managing that and accepting that and being, kind. I come onto that kind of compassionate towards your anxiety rather than wasting energy and time trying not to be. And um, equally, ignoring the people who say, just don't worry about it, just chill
mm,
out. Um, so, it's just inevitable. It's one of these, like in life, there are some things that are just going to be hard. You can't, IVF is always going to be hard. It can't be easy. So that's really, really important. It's just somehow just accepting, okay, this is going to be tricky, but maybe not for a lot of women. It's just getting through the first trimester and maybe to sort of 14 or 16 weeks. And it does taper. Um, so somehow kind of building up a what I talk about with women early on is how are we going to build up a kind of compassionate toolkit to support you through this, possibly first trimester or beyond, but being really intentional. This is going to be tough. This is going to be difficult. So let's think about it together. And I touched on this before, but what can we think about that's going to help you through this? You take a lot of women will be taking great care about what they eat, what they drink, maybe even what they breathe, let's think. I have this conversation a lot. Let's think about what you're going to consume in terms of information. So I have a good
mm,
old chit chat about social media and and what online places they are visiting for their information. I have to restrain myself because I have quite strong views about that. And as a therapist,
Mm,
I really shouldn't. But we talk about sensible places to go, sensible holes to dive down. Um, yeah. So there's that. I will restrain myself from that. It's a whole other podcast, isn't it? So, but that digital consumption, I think, is as important as drinking alcohol or not, frankly. Um, and then thinking, as I say, just thinking about those things that can be really supportive, the people you want to hang out with, the film, because I mean, this sounds a bit odd as a therapist. As a therapist in therapy, my job is often to kind of dig into the unprocessed feelings, the things that have been pushed to the side or in the shadows that are not processed and not healed. But actually, with this one, going through, the 2-week wait in IVF or going through the waiting in an early pregnancy, it's of help to be consciously avoidant here.
mm, mm,
So, there's a big difference there. It's changing the channel of your mind. In this one is a therapeutic thing to do.
mm,
So have things at your disposal that can give you some respite, even if it's just 20 minutes, that
mm,
that if you're doing that gentle yoga or I mean, I spoke to somebody recently who rips out plants and replants them in her garden. Just go for it. As I say,
mm,
some people might make sourdough bread or really intricate mindful stuff, coloring in or, tapestry or whatever. So, um, that sort of work I think is really important, and having your support if you're lucky enough to have people who get it around you. That I think we all have people in our lives, a kind of repertoire. This is my experience anyway, that we've got some people you love and adore and fab, but they just don't get it, and they won't really nourish you at that time. So yeah, I'm not saying have make a grand gesture and saying I'm not going to be able to see you for 3 months, but just being mindful about how you fill your time. Um,
mm.
there was something else there, but oh, at the risk of doing some product placement, Hannah, uh, I think acupuncture is really helpful. I
I didn't
really
pay you to say that.
You didn't, and I'm not just sort of sucking up to you to be extra nice to me, but I discovered this in my early pregnant in all my when I had acupuncture, my nervous system settled down. It really
Mm,
did, and it really helped with the sick. Well, this is really helped with the sickness, but it really helped with that anxious piece. So
mm.
might not be acupuncture, as I say, it's all part of that tool, that kit bag. Find something that helps
Yeah.
your nervous system calm down. It's the parasympathetic nervous system we're talking about here. Um, so yeah, just to wrap up, it's a crappy thing to go through. There's no two ways about it. But don't waste energy of bending yourself out of shape to try and do it
Mm,
without. There's a whole other conversation we can have about being stressed in your pregnancy is okay.
mm,
It's not going to affect the pregnancy, and it's not going to affect the baby. Um,
mm,
we're tough old boots,
mm,
and that's there is research, but it's research for extremely chronic systemic stress that affect. Anyway, I'm not going to go. There's a whole other
mm.
podcast, I
Yeah.
know, but being
But
stressed in pregnancy is okay.
yeah. And it's a thing that comes up a lot in our clinic, and it's a reason lots of people do turn to
Yes.
acupuncture or reflexology.
Yeah.
It's that feeling of having some control about being
Yes.
able to operate with your stress, about how to switch your stress off, because obviously you can't be told to just relax and it will suddenly switch off. But being able to find something, whether it, like you say, whether it's coloring or yoga or acupuncture, that actually puts your body into that rest and digest place, can really help you feel empowered. Even if it's for 20 minutes, I always say you're just reminding the body it's okay to go here. And it might not stay there for very long, but it's just been there for a little bit, and that was really nice. And our
And
bodies are made to deal with stress.
I'm sure these are conversations you dive into, but too, little and often.
Yeah.
Don't don't expect, just be realistic about it. If you can't do 20 minutes meditation or half an hour of mat work, then just little your day. I actually talk to people about setting an alarm on their phone. Um,
Mm,
and, every 45 minutes having a nice, not some horrible klaxon, but, a nice little chime, and just take that moment. And if you're lucky, that moment, a moment's a flabby phrase. If you've got 5 minutes, then you can stand up and do some stretches, some breathing, feel your feet into the ground, all that. I do a lot of, like you, parasympathetic
mm,
breath. But if you've got 30 seconds is enough to just check that your jaw isn't gripped or your shoulders
mm,
aren't up by your ears.
mm.
Um, just if you get into the habit of kind of regularly checking in and with that compassionate inner climate, with that kind of, just like you, and I always come back to this metaphor. Look, if your best mate or your loved one was sat next to you, all hunched up, you would instinctively just give them a hug and use your body to calm them down. But we don't know how to do that with ourselves. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's great. It's great. I love having some, and I know people listening love it as well, is having just some concrete ideas and advice and information to hold on to. Some practical things that people can do is just so helpful, because that just, it comes back to that feeling of having a bit of control when it feels like so many things are out of your control.
Yeah, I mean, I won't. We haven't got time now, but I do walk people through a little protocol that I've got, to just, yeah, get into the habit of not being mind taxis. And that's, I mean, that this applies to all anxious events in our lives, but we can get so preoccupied with our prefrontal cortex is on fire trying to make sense and running ahead and everything. So just drift up into our brains. But the work that you guys do is just so crucial. And I'm only a talking therapist, so I'm not a specialist, and I can just whiz through the rubrics. But yeah, embodying ourselves, getting down below the head is really going to help us and support us, and just to make the ground feel a bit steadier under our feet. Because
Mm,
in order
mm,
to do that, we've got to feel our feet on the ground. So anyway, I'm sort of
mm.
going off on one, but
I love
I
it.
can't feel
Well, Julia, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. It's been an absolute honor to talk to you. So thank you so much. I will put all your details at the end of the show. So thanks everybody for listening. I really hope you have found this episode helpful.